Hey everyone, it's the end of November now, so I just wanted to do a quick video talking about some of the books I picked up this month because some of them were pretty special to me, so I'm kind of happy about it. And I traveled down to this bookstore. Well, I was on a trip for Thanksgiving going down to San Diego, and I went to a bookstore in La Jolla, which is sort of a little north of San Diego, and I went to this new and used bookstore called D.G. Will's Bookstore. It's a privately run bookstore, and I would highly recommend it. It was my first time visiting there, but what I managed to find there, well, a few things. I got an American first edition of Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh, which for the longest time was my favorite book, actually, until I read Moby Dick. So it's now my second favorite book. So I was really happy that I was able to get one of these. I own several copies of the book, but this is obviously when you get a first edition, it's something special for sure. So it's published by Little Brown. I think for those of you who watched my book haul from last month, you might recall that I got a first edition also from Little Brown of The End of the Sword of Honor trilogy by Waugh. And that was special, but not quite as special as this because obviously, this was published about 20 years earlier and this is his most famous book. So here you and it also has the dust cover, so 1945. So now all I have to do is track down a British first edition, but I was happy to find this as well. I couldn't believe that I came across it and that I got it for the price that I did, and so it was really special to me. Another thing I picked up from the same bookstore for $1 actually is a 116-year-old edition of it appears to be some collected works of Hawthorne. This is from 1902. The volume is called Little Masterpieces, so there's a little photograph of Hawthorne, and it was published, as I said, 1902 by Doubleday and McClure, 1902. So this was actually in their sort of bargain area, and I like Hawthorne. I like him really more because of his connection with Melville, but I'm also a fan of what I've read so far of his work, so I figured I would pick it up and read it a little bit. A big thing for me is for a while I've been wanting to read James Boswell's Life of Johnson, and so I was debating the edition to get, and actually when I went to the bookseller there, he offered me a handful of different editions, and I told him, well, I don't want something too nice because it's a long book, so I'm going to be carrying it in my backpack or my bag for many days. It'll probably take me a few weeks to read it, so I didn't want to ruin too good of an edition. So he gave me this copy of the book for $7.50. It's an early edition of Everyman, which some of you are probably familiar with Everyman. They have the kind of red dust covers. I have a few of them over there. Now this one is interesting because there's actually no date on it. So I've been trying to ascertain what the date is. Just from the sort of perfunctory research I did, Everyman, those editions began, the first editions of Everyman were around, it sounds like 1906. So I don't know how old this one is. I do have an Everyman edition of a Mark Twain book from 1917, and that has the date on it. So I sort of wonder whether this edition is actually even older than that, because it wouldn't make sense that they would have dates on the books in 1917 and then go to not having dates. So I'm wondering whether the earlier editions did not have dates and they added it later. So I'm sort of considering how to figure out what the date of this book is. I'm going to feel kind of strange carrying a 100-year-old book in my pack, but it's pretty sturdy, and it's something I've always wanted to read because I've always been, well, not always, obviously I didn't know about Sam Johnson as a kid, but he seems like a very intriguing character, and I'm looking forward to reading it. So I'm probably going to be reading this during the holidays. The last but not least is a relatively new book that came out, I believe it came out in September, by an author named Jack Donovan, who is an author who writes nonfiction. He does nonfiction books and essays on masculinity. And this book is interesting because it basically is, well, I don't want to review it right now because this is just a book haul video, so maybe I'll review it later. But basically, the idea of the book is Donovan takes concepts from Friedrich Nietzsche's books and sort of boils them down into a more modern context, because obviously Nietzsche was alive until 1900, and so his sort of criticisms of society are somewhat dated now. So what Donovan does very well is he sort of looks at Nietzsche's concepts from the 1800s and from earlier, because obviously when you talk about things like genealogy of morals, Nietzsche is talking about things extending back into antiquity. And so what Donovan does a good job of is he sort of takes the principles from Genealogy of Morality and other books by Nietzsche and sort of puts them in a more modern context, which I like. So I may actually review this book later. It's a pretty short book. I've actually already read it, and I plan on reading it again. And so I actually got this one online. I didn't get it at a cozy bookstore. So those are the books I picked up for this month. Hopefully I'll be able to plug through them real quick. And well, I've already read Brideshead Revisited, and I probably wouldn't read a first edition for worry of damaging it. But I got it, and man, I was pretty stoked when I picked it up and opened it and looked at it. So, all right, until next time.